Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third live webinar of the fifth edition of the PhD and Career Development MOOC. After running this MOOC for 4 years in a row and exclusively in French, this is our first live webinar in English. Tonight, 3 members of the PhDOOC Association will be moderating the webinar. Here is Sarah from PhDOOC.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, Benedict.
And we also have Virginie, who is monitoring the chat. And my name is Benedict.
We also have Sarah Blackford, who is a career strategist for PhDs with more than 25 years of experience. Good evening, Sarah, and thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Sure,
thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Oh, yes. So I'm Sarah Blackford. I have over 25 years of careers experience. I started off in research and I maneuvered my career in a sort of crazy paving kind of way into careers work. And I've been working with scientists particularly, but I work with many other different disciplines as well. I've got a website and I'm on LinkedIn and various social media. So if you ever want to contact me, you'll be able to find me very easily.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. And many thanks to those of you who are attending this live webinar. Feel free to post your comments and ask your questions in the live chat on YouTube. The chat box is located on the right of the video on YouTube, and you will need to be logged in via your Google or Gmail account. Also, since this is the first webinar, that focused on answering technical questions about the MOOC and the training platform was in French, feel free to ask more general questions about these topics in the chat. And we'll keep some time at the end of the webinar to answer those. So tonight we will focus on the creation of a career development plan. And before we start, I know you have some key definitions that you would like to share with us. This is Sarah, so please, you can start sharing your screen.
Okay, right, here we go then. Okay, so, well, hello everyone, and it's very nice to be here this evening. You can see from the title of this webinar today, how to prepare for your next career step with and without a plan. So I'm going to explain what that means as we go along. And so you'll see that there's different ways in which you can manage and plan your career. So, let me see. So let's just look at the definition of career first, okay? So if we look at it in terms of a noun, the career is really described as a progress through life. And this is very sort of old-fashioned meaning of career, and it kind of implies that it's under your control and it's a nice linear path. But if you look at career as a verb, so to career around, it's more to move in an uncontrolled way. And this really does tend to represent people's careers equally and possibly more so than as a noun these days. So if you combine the two, I think that then shows you how you can plan your career with and without a plan. So it's a contradiction in terms, really, to say career planning. And I'll just draw your attention to 2 quotes which really illustrate this. So one, this is supposed to be from a quote from John Lennon. I'm not sure if that's true, but it says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So, you know, you can make all the plans you like, but life will intervene. And also chance favors the brave. So people talk about luck in their careers. When you hear people talk about their career stories, luck comes up a lot. And what they mean is chance encounters, chance happenings. So let's see how that maps onto a proper career theory. And so this is quite an old theory, a theory of planning that was proposed in 1977 called the DOTS model. And careers advisors still use it. I still use it to structure my career workshops and also career guidance. So it's stood the test of time. And then more recently, we have this one called harnessing chance. So you can see how these 2 theories sort of map onto this idea of the career that is planned and unplanned, or under your control, not under your control. And this is called planned happenstance. So let me show you a very simplistic diagram that illustrates this DOTS model. This is the planned model. You can see where the DOTS comes from. It's decisions, opportunity, transition, and self. And these are the 4 areas that really you should pay attention to if you are going to plan your career. So a lot of people like to look at their CV, make sure their CV or their resume is up to date, and prepare for an interview and go job seeking and looking for vacancies. But a lot of the time people don't spend that really important part of the planning process, which is to examine themselves. And a lot of surveys that are done and reports that are produced from research that's done, asking PhD students about all sorts of things about their career. One thing they tend not to do is to be able to recognize their strengths, their skills, and what they have to offer employers. And also other things come into it, like your values, your interests, your personality. And these are really important, not only to plan your career, not only to think about what career would suit you, but also when you do go to interview, you will be asked these questions in the interview. You know, tell me about yourself. Why do you want this job? And so this part, I would say, is really fundamental to the career planning process. And we're going to look at that in a bit more detail during the session. And then finally, decisions. So it's important to make decisions, but that they're informed. So you need to have all the facts and all the information to hand, and listen to the professionals and do research for yourself, and so that you can take informed decisions and then take action. Now, let's just map that onto the planned happenstance model, and then things become a bit more messy. So here we are, a big squiggle in the middle. That's life. Life is unpredictable. Life just happens, doesn't it? And things like, wouldn't we know last year that our lives would be turned upside down in the biggest way possible of our generation? And, we've had to adapt to that. And that's what we have to do all the time in our careers. And it is about adapting and flexing and being able to maybe take a bit of a risk and come out of our comfort zone. So the way in which this theory was put forward was also to show you the kind of activities, the kind of things that you should do in order to harness this planned happenstance. So being curious and going out and coming to events like this and meeting people online, and always engaging in meetings and finding out new information, reading around your subject. That will bring you into contact with other people, and that's where chance happenings happen. As I said, taking a risk, that's more like coming out of your comfort zone. If you feel uncomfortable, then you're learning, you're creating new experiences that could be beneficial to you. And then being flexible and being able to adapt, it's so important, especially in this fast moving world of technology and global opportunities, and things are changing all the time. And then finally, being proactive and positive. So you need to be in the driving seat of your own career. You'll have people around you to support you, but you need to be in the driving seat. So when you take all that together, when you listen to people's career stories, and, there's a lot of them online, there's a lot of case studies that you can hear about, and people tell their stories, you can see that they've had a plan, but in amongst that story, you will probably hear they'll say something like, oh, I just happened to meet somebody, and then I had a lucky moment, and oh, a turning point in my life. And that's that planned happenstance that comes into play. So I think we'll just stop there and see if there are any questions for me to answer at this stage.
Yes, there are a few questions, but I think we should address them at the very end of the webinar because they're a bit general, and they will probably benefit from the rest of the presentation. So over to you, Sarah.
Okay, well, maybe the answers will be, the questions will be answered by the end of the session. So let's see, let's carry on. So,
yes. No, I was leaning over to Sarah from PhDOOC.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, we are to Sarah.
Yeah. I'll I'll hand over to you, Sarah. Sarah
Okay, so briefly coming back to the MOOC, over the 3 first units, you have spent some time better understanding the job market, identifying your skills, and going through the steps of the creation of a career development plan. So tonight, we will start by sharing the results from the pre-unit survey of Unit 3. And the question was, do you have an idea of the job position you would like to apply for after your PhD? Or if you have already graduated and find a job as a PhD, do you have an idea of your future career progressions? So for around 30% of you, yes, you have a precise career plan. So that's a great news. And for half of you, your plan is not as clear, but you focus on a given sector or a subject area. So we hope the work you have done together this week helped you.
Thank you for sharing this information, Sarah. We hope that you all found these 3 first units helpful and useful, especially the 3rd unit. Now, coming back to you, Sarah, do you have a way to help people dive a bit deeper into how ready they actually are to transition to their next career step?
Yeah, I think this will help a lot with the survey detail. So these are 6 questions, and you'll see that the top one, you've already answered that. So this is asking you how sure you are about what you want to do. So we've got the answers to that. Most of you said amber, which is the middle one, you know, not too sure. 20% of you weren't sure at all, and then 30% were very sure. So you can see we've got the red, the amber, and the green for sure, not too sure, and unsure. So what I'd ask you to do at this point, individually, obviously, is just to go down that list and just mark yourself. What do you think you are? A red, an amber, or an orange, or green for each of those questions. So some of them you might score a red, and some might be an orange, and some might be a green. So that will be different for everybody. So just go down that list now and mark yourself, and we'll just give you a few seconds to read through those questions. So the second one's about knowing yourself. So that's that self part of the DOTS model. The career planning stage is, you know, all the things that you need to do to prepare, which, you know, includes your CV as well, and how much do you know about the job market, and your networking. How connected are you? How well networked are you? Are you starting to build relationships with people in communities that you're interested to work in? And then finally, how much time do you actually spend thinking about your career? You probably spent a lot more time this week than you have in a long time, perhaps, you know, and it does depend on your career stage. If you're coming towards the end of your PhD, maybe it's more present in your mind. Okay, so I hope you've had time to do that. So what I'd like you to do is just to sort of add up whether you've scored mainly red on those 6 questions, mainly orange, so you're sort of semi-prepared, or mainly green, very prepared. So be honest with yourself and decide where you'd position yourself there. Okay, and I can tell you that usually when I run this session, the orange comes up tops as it did in your survey, so around about 50%. And then the red and the orange is 30, 20%, it interchanges. So let's have a look at how that then maps onto a kind of matrix. So sorry about the bright colours. So here, this is the red part. So this is where, if you score mainly red, then you're really going to benefit from this MOOC, because, you know, you're going to find out a lot of things that you haven't actually addressed yet. You're not really sure what you want to do. You don't really have any plans. You're not networking. You've got an old CV. So that was kind of how I was when I was doing my research. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I think, you know, this can be quite common for people to feel this way. And then if we go to the top right-hand quadrant, These are people who are working on their career, perhaps have been doing a lot of work, preparing themselves, getting well networked, getting to know people, know about all the job options. So they've considered all the job options. They've made an informed choice about what they want to do, perhaps have even got a targeted CV. But you may be somewhere in there, but not kind of at this far end. You might be sort of around this area. Now, for the people who've scored themselves with the orange, mainly orange for their answers, you could be in one of these two quadrants. So if you know what you want to do, then you'll be in this quadrant, but maybe you haven't really done a lot towards planning for your career. You know what you want to do, but you haven't worked on your CV, you haven't been networking, you don't really know about other options. And then alternatively, you may not know what you want to do, but you have been doing some activity, you have been trying to look at your CV and go online and network with people, but it's a little bit unclear in which direction you're going. So perhaps you're not as focused as you could be. So you'll be somewhere on that matrix. So you can position yourself, and obviously then all the some career planning activities and the career development learning that you do in this session and also throughout the MOOC, you will benefit from some areas and not so much from others because you already have prepared these things. So this is how, you know, the MOOC is going to be really relevant to everybody in sort of one way or another. Okay, so let's stop there and just check that there's no more questions at this point.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't think we have more questions on the actual career plan and about how people, about how ready people feel. So maybe we should just move on. And the MOOC, we actually provided resources to help the participants build their career development plan. And one of the key steps of that plan is to do some self-exploration besides the career exploration you talked about. So would you mind elaborating a bit on the topic of self-exploration, Sarah, please?
Yes, so there's we will come to this, but there are many activities that you can do to reflect on what might be suitable for you in your career. And there's lots of different elements to think about. There's lots of things that influence your career. So, you know, there's you, yourself. So things like, what are you interested in? What do you enjoy doing? What skills have you got? What's your background? You know, what are your values? What's your goal? Are you interested in money and status and salary? Or are you interested in doing good in the world or security and good work-life balance? So all those things, it's a real jumble of things. And then you have people influencing you around you, people in your environment, in your work environment, who might be sort of persuading you that an academic career is the best career, or, you know, there might be people in your family or other things that you see that influence you. And then, of course, there's these aspects that we can't control, you know, so things like the pandemic or globalization, the labor market, and all sorts of things. So within that, you need to kind of find your way. And, you know, reflecting and understanding yourself is not something that happens overnight. You know, we learn about ourselves throughout our lives. And I think, you know, the more you work on this, and, you know, we will only touch the surface really in this webinar, you know, the more that you will kind of understand what kind of career will work for you. And you think, I started in research, I moved into scientific publishing, and I finally ended up in the place I want to be, because the thing that grounds me is I like to help people. I like to support and, you know, offer these career workshops and career guidance. But I could have been a nurse, you know, I could have moved into something like that instead and still helping people. So, you know, you will find your way. And if you feel uncertain at this moment, it's not a problem, because this is perfectly normal at your career stage, you know, especially if you're quite young at the moment. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay, it's not really an answer, it's more
No, it's perfect.
But look, let's carry on, and I'll come to that a bit later, and we'll sort of distill out one part of it, which will mean that it's you know, a little bit more sensible. Okay, So let's move on and let's just quickly look at the job market, because I know that you've covered this already, but it's good to just sort of know what kind of roles are out there. So obviously, you know, there's the academic research, but, you know, remember that this happens in different institutions. So if you're somebody who, you know, wants to teach and be around students, then obviously within a university, you get the opportunity to do that. If that is not what you're interested in, you know, maybe you would do a postdoc outside in a research institute or in a government or a charitable or even in a company. So you can carry on doing your postdoc, and, you know, there are all sorts of different postdocs. There's applied ones, there's basic research, there's enterprising ones. So, you know, be careful about what you choose, and that it will suit you in terms of what you want to do in the future. But of course, you can do research in a non-academic environment. And again, you know, you don't just have to think of yourself in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the discipline. You know, you might be a medical or a biochemist or a molecular biologist, you might be a plant scientist or an ecologist, or, you know, many different disciplines, humanities, social sciences. But when you come out of academia, it's really, you know, the skills that you've been using and the interests that you have that will guide you into determining what kind of role you want to play. So you may end up as a data analyst, or you may end up in a non sort of biological or scientific company. If you're a scientist, you might end up in the media or in a company that is looking for customer analysis. Policy think tanks, non-governmental organizations. So there's lots and lots of places where people want people who are good at research, who are professional researchers. And then there are these specialist services where if you like to work on the front line, and a lot of PhD students, researchers say, oh, you know, I like the research, but I don't have enough contact with people. And then there's these more frontline positions like advisory roles and liaison, connecting and interacting with other people, being on various different projects rather than just on one project. If people are more applied and like the commercial side, there's plenty of opportunities there as well. Tech transfer, patents, regulatory affairs, commercialization. And then communication is very popular with people who do a PhD. You have to communicate your knowledge in some way through papers, conferences, but some people like to do outreach. Some people get involved in publishing or public engagement. So there's loads and loads of different roles within science communication and communication generally. And so you really need to position yourself and decide, you know, do I want to be a writer? Do I want to be someone who stands in front of people with exotic experiments, or do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to be a policy maker? So, you know, there's a wide range of roles. In teaching, somebody said to me when I was younger, oh, you should be a teacher. And I thought, oh, I couldn't think of anything worse for me to be a teacher, because my vision of a teacher was somebody standing in front of school children. But if you broaden your horizons more and you look and you see, you can do things like professional development, you can be a coach, you can be a tech specialist in education. So there's lots of different things you can do and still be a teacher in inverted commas. There's lots and lots of different roles in administration, and you'll see people possibly in your own institution who did a PhD and have moved on to the administrative and support side. And they're quite happy to be in the work environment that they really enjoy, but they're more on the management side. Self-employment, I'm a self-employed career specialist, but I started that quite recently when I felt confident that I had the services and the contacts, and I've done my market research. So this might be something that comes later, or it may be that you are a natural entrepreneur and you've got ideas for a product or service. And then finally, people go on and do all sorts of things. You know, they may have a PhD, but it's actually their interests, their hobbies, things that perhaps you were interested in before you did a PhD, or even earlier than that, that you come back to later in your life and you move out of the research sector completely. So that's just a flavour really of all the different types of roles that you could contemplate, and really just scratching the surface. And you've also got to know where to look for these jobs as well. And I know that you've already had a session on this. I'm not going to go into detail, but obviously this is really important. You need to be looking around, researching the job market, just as you would doing literature searches associated with your PhD. You need to become very conversant in the kind of careers that you're interested in, and going into those communities and listening to them and hearing about what they're doing and the language that they're using. And I've put networking in here. And again, I know you're going to have a networking session later in the MOOC, which is so important. And I've just put some screenshots up here of some articles that have been written about how important it is to use networking for your career. So I've also just done a screenshot of the PhD MOOC, the PhDOOC, because these guys, they're on LinkedIn, they're also on Twitter, and they're great places to not only find jobs, but also to network. So shall I carry on with the...
We do have one question actually.
Okay.
So the question is, to what extent doing a postdoc can close opportunities? From GS.
Yeah, I think it depends on the postdoc that you do. I've heard employers be very happy to take people who've done a postdoc because they feel that they've become like a professional researcher. You know, when you're doing a PhD, you're an apprentice, you're working towards a qualification, but then after that, you go down the route. And being a postdoc, it takes on a lot more responsibility than a PhD. And, you know, you are a colleague and you're working with your supervisor. And that is so important, to choose somebody who's going to empower you in order that you can excel and do the things that will help you to, you know, find your way, find your career. You don't want someone who's going to sort of stifle you and not support you in moving out into industry as well. And I would tend to say, if you are thinking of going down that route, then try to aim for those kind of postdocs that are more applied, where maybe they're partnering with industry. You know, I mean, I know that there are some institutes that even let postdocs do internships as well. So I think it doesn't hold you back. What the danger is to stay in a postdoc for too long, and then it's harder to get out into industry, because you've become so sort of entrenched in the academic world that, you know, just changing and getting into the industry world is harder. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but it does make it harder. So think when you do your first postdoc, that's absolutely fine. But just remember, if you go into your second postdoc, then you want to be reflecting on what your career goals are.
Thank you, Sarah. We have one more question from Christophe. What about slashers who have multiple activities and projects? What place for them for these ones? Do you believe this be a career opportunity with a PhD?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the first part of that question.
First part, what about slashers who have multiple activities and projects? Maybe it's a French.
I guess people having multiple jobs, maybe.
Mm.
Is that someone doing a PhD, but on multiple projects?
And I think the question is, if you are a PhD, can you transition to a place where you actually work in potentially in different companies, or you have different jobs as a way for you to actually do the things that you like the most? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
Well, I'm not sure that I understand the question fully, but I think once you've, you know, when you are in a PhD, obviously you are only working on your, you know, on your PhD project. But once you move out of your PhD and into industry, you will have to work on different projects. And so it's important that you can demonstrate that to industry. So if you have worked on multiple projects while you've been doing your PhD, that's actually an asset, because they want to know that you can switch and change, and you're not going to get, you know, wedded to just one thing, and you can also communicate with different people. So it's all about teamwork as well. So I think, you know, any multiple projects or any collaborating that you can do while you're doing your PhD is a real asset to you if you are thinking of moving out and into business and industry.
Okay, thank you. So finally, let's move on to the last part of your talk, Sarah. Do you have any pieces of advice about how people can navigate and own their career?
Navigate and own their career. So, is that a question?
No, it's you can move on to the last part of your talk.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So let's have a look at this self part, because people are asking questions, aren't they? And I think it's something that, you know, you wonder what you should do in order to really address this part of the career planning theory, the career planning process. And so I've just broken this down into 4 areas. It looks a bit sort of complicated, but it's not. There's you in the middle: your interests, your skills, your personality, your values. So these are only 4 aspects that I've picked up on from the ones that I talked about earlier. And interests tend to be the things that sit on the surface. So if somebody says, oh, you know, who are you? What do? You will talk about being a researcher, doing a PhD, maybe talk about the discipline that you're in. It might be biology, it might be music, it might be environment, whatever it is. And then you might have hobbies as well that you're interested in. And then underneath this are the skills that you're developing while you're doing your research. So you are developing all these things. And when you look back at yourself as an undergraduate student or a master's student, and now as a PhD student, you know, you will have gained a lot of extra skills, even in your first year, even in the first 6 months, you will. And also, you know, personal traits and qualities that you will start to acquire. And your personality generally stays quite static throughout your career, but, you know, there are people who like to be on the front line, as I said before, people who prefer to be behind the scenes, people do things differently. And again, it's really important that you understand that when you're working with other people, you know, when, you know, you think that there's a communication problem or there's a difficulty, and usually it's because someone's got a different personality, they're just doing it differently to you. And communication is always the best you know, solution in any of these situations, but it can influence the kind of career that you might want to get into as well. And then here I've put values, which I mentioned earlier, and these are very important for people. They kind of anchor them, and they do change over your career. So it might be at the moment you're really keen on, you know, getting your data out, being creative, and, you know, moving on in your career, but then later you have a family, you might be more interested to be stable and have security, or you may be looking for more status and a more managerial position. So, you know, these are also lying under the surface, and it could determine the kind of work environment and the type of company that you want to work for as well. So let's focus in. So I said we were going to drill down and simplify this a bit. So we're going to just focus on the interests and the skills here. When we focus in on the self, okay? So it's going to really sort of bring it down and ignore the other areas, okay? Normally when I do my workshops, I bring in all the other ones, but we're skating on the surface today, and I think this will be useful for you. So let's just have a look at those skills and what kind of skills and abilities are you gaining from your research experience. And so I think most of you would agree that if I asked you that question and you were to sort of post things up on a big notice board, that you would come up with all your specialist knowledge that you're learning about and all the different techniques, all those functional skills that you need in order to answer your research question, to generate the data. And, you know, many of you are teaching yourselves programming or teaching yourselves different techniques. You're having to work things out for yourself. So you don't have people to delegate to. The publications, that is your productivity. So if you don't communicate your research in journals, then it doesn't exist in the, in terms of academia, but you can also be communicating in other ways as well. So, things like social media or talking to the public, teaching. And then building an international reputation by going to conferences, maybe speaking or having a poster. Some of you will be teaching. Most of you will probably have to supervise students and mentor them, and that's really important, especially if you're moving on to being a postdoc. And then any other research associated activities. You might be setting up a journal club, or you might be running a MOOC and doing other things around your research. So there's all these things, but all the other skills that you're also acquiring as you go along are under the surface, but you're having to use these skills and you're developing them without really realizing it. And I'm sure that most of you, if I said to you, give me an example of, having presented your work or managing projects or problem solving or being self-motivated, you'd all be able to come up with examples of these. And there's many, many more as well. And I think one of the things that I find when I'm working with PhD researchers and with PhD postdocs is that they underestimate their ability, because you're in an environment where everyone's doing this. You are scholars, you are academics yourselves, and you are in an environment where everybody's doing this. So you take yourselves for granted. But outside of academia, employers are really crying out for people like you, people who are can-do people, who are not afraid of technology, who are good researchers, thorough with your methodologies, and you can manage and do all these things. So that is a key aspect, especially when you're presenting yourself online and when you're presenting yourself in a CV or interview anywhere, is to really be positive about all these aspects of your PhD and of your research. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how these skills and interests that I've just listed can be categorized. And this comes from another theory of career choice from a man called John Holland. And he proposed these 6 areas. So the first one is functional, which is all about the skills that you use when you're using your quantitative, qualitative methodologies. You're using the tools and techniques, maybe programming, you're just doing hands-on practical stuff, tinkering with machinery and getting it to work, anything like that. And you're doing this in order to discover, to answer your research questions, to generate new knowledge, to learn about other knowledge, curiosity, analysis, interpretation, and you go back again and you do more functional work. So these are 2 key areas that are associated with PhD and research. The other ones, artistic, this is more like the interpretation of your research. So it's the communication, it could be visually, it could be through public outreach, it could be through photography, it could be all sorts of things in the way in which you're being more artistic with the way that you present your research. Social is more about helping, teaching, advising, instructing, supervising, anything that's to do with interacting with people. And obviously, people who really enjoy teaching might really identify with this area. Enterprising is interesting because, a lot of PhD researchers don't think they're very enterprising, but in fact, you have to be very innovative when you're an academic because you have to be looking for money and new avenues. You've always got your competitors there. In fact, your research group is like a small company and your research supervisor is like their company, and they're having to go out and find money and find sponsors and collaborators like you would have to do in a small startup or a small company. And you're within that company helping them to do that and hopefully engaging and being able to get experience, especially if you're a postdoc, to do those kind of activities. But that translates really well if you're going to move out and into industry, because again, this is exactly the kind of people that they're looking for. And then finally, management. Well, management, we all have to manage ourselves. We all have to do some management and admin, and you're all project managers and juggling lots of different tasks all at the same time. But some people love doing this kind of work, and they sometimes, want to bring that into their next role. So it may be that they become a scientific coordinator or they move out and into industry. So these 6 categories are kind of really describing and categorizing all the things that you do. And again, in my workshops, I would get people to put post-it notes, and we do all sorts of colorful activities. But what I like you to do in this instance is just to examine all of those 6 categories. And I think what's important is to think about what you actually enjoy doing, because the whole point about careers is that as you move forward in your career, you leave behind the things that you don't really enjoy, and you bring forward and do more of the things you like doing. So we all have to do tasks we don't like, but we don't want it to be, 70% of our job. So going back to this diagram again, this Holland's diagram, we'll just give you a few seconds now to reread these categories and decide which ones would you place at the top of your list, which will be your top 3. So I should just have a drink of water and let you think about that. Okay, so people usually know what their top 2 are, and they know what they really don't like. The 3, 4, 5 can sometimes be a bit more tricky, but it's not a perfect system, but it does start getting you to sort of channel down. It's a bit like when you do your literature search. If you looked at the whole of the literature, you'd be overwhelmed by it. But if you can just channel down into a few areas, it might help you to be more focused. So then you've got to think about, well, what do you enjoy doing, and how's that then linked to jobs? Okay, so I've put up this screenshot of me doing my webinars. I was doing them in person previously, but this is obviously what I enjoy doing. I like to help people, and so social obviously is my best one, and I like the investigative work, but obviously it's not investigative like you do. It's more looking at what careers people can do and keeping an eye on the job market and helping people with their careers. So going back to this hexagon again, and you'll see that I've replaced the skills with types of jobs. So here in the functional, if that's your big thing and you love doing it, and you like programming, or you love doing your experiments, then you may move on to be a postdoc. But when you look at what your supervisor does, they're never probably around doing the actual research itself. And so, they might be teaching or doing admin or applying for grants and so on. So you've got to think, what do I actually want to do? Because moving into business and industry may suit you better in terms of the things that you enjoy doing. But bearing in mind, of course, the values, because the values change and you change. And a lot of people do end up in a managerial position, because as you progress in your career, inevitably you start to delegate and you end up being the person who directs everybody else. But look, these are just ideas here that I've put into these boxes, and you'll get the slides. You can look at those again later. So we won't dwell on it for too long, but it may be sort of, as I said at the start, starting to think about your options. Even if you know exactly what you want to do, you may now know, yes, actually, I was right. This is what I want to do. This has confirmed it to me. Or it may be that you're thinking, actually, maybe there's some other areas I could investigate. So I'll just finally close this section of the workshop by saying that this Ichigai model is not mine. It was proposed it's a Japanese model, and I've put a reference here for it. But this Ichigai is a Japanese concept, and if you reach your Ichigai, it means that you're doing what you love and what you're good at, and the world needs it, and you'll get paid for it as well. Now, you can't always manage all of those. You may find that doing what you're doing now is your Ichigai, and you move on to do a postdoc and you're loving it and everything's wonderful. But the problem with doing a postdoc is if you don't then progress to be an academic, you sort of fall out of the system because the world won't pay for you anymore. So you want to try and keep this Ichigai going. And, that may be that some of the things that you do while you're doing your PhD, you're not being paid for it, you're volunteering, but you really enjoy it. So it might be something that you take with you after you've done your PhD and you shift into one of those other areas of the hexagon and away from the functional. Perhaps you take the investigative with you, but usually most jobs incorporate about 2 or 3 of those areas, those categories. Okay, so I'll stop there for the moment and hand back to Sarah to see if there's any questions.
There's no question for the moment in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't see any questions, but at the same time, I thank you for going through all these slides very thoroughly, because this is the kind of exercises people should really do to start writing and crafting the career plan. So it's great that you went through all of this, and people can watch the whole slides again to get your advice again and get the methods again. Do you have some final advice for people that we can go over briefly, and then we'll move on to the last, the questions that we got at the very beginning of the webinar?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the end, as I said, career planning, you know, you can set off on your journey with your goal in mind, and you may not end up there. You may come across obstacles that get in your way, and, you know, you may have to overcome those obstacles, or you may end up in a different place. But actually that other place may be more interesting than the one that you had in mind in the first place. So I think, you know, we always say, you know, if you come across obstacles, then, you know, that's a good thing in a way, because it builds resilience and it kind of prepares us. You know, we need that to almost build up an immunity for our own, you know, the hazards of life, as it were. So if something, you know, isn't working, think of it as a temporary situation. Think that things will get better. And the best thing to do is always to communicate, always to tell people and get support, you know, in a professional way, and try to reach out and, you know, look around you, use that curiosity, the risk, the flexibility of the planned happenstance, and, you know, try to remain positive and proactive, because, you know, we are in difficult times, but actually having a PhD and being a highly skilled person gives you a real advantage in these days where, you know, a lot of countries are looking towards people who have got good research skills and good high level qualifications, because it's generating wealth, it's helping to move technology forward. So I think, you know, you can be very positive about the future.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let me move on to the final part. But before I do, I'll just mention the selling yourself, because I know that you will already have covered this, or you will be covering it anyway. But just for completeness, I just got a nice screenshot here of Benedicte, which I think is a lovely picture and a beautiful background there. And also I've drawn attention again to the Twitter presence of the MOOC. So, you know, do think about your presence online before you start networking. You need to have a professional presence, and it's really important. So when you're selling yourself, if you're applying for a job with your CV, your covering letter, you're aiming for an interview, you can guarantee that you will get Googled and people will look for you. And so you've almost got to do that and pay attention to your online presence and the way that you're presenting yourself before you start doing all the other stuff, okay? But I know you're going to have a good session on that. So let's finally end up with the decision making and action planning. So how are you going to enhance your employability? So employability, it means that your ability to be employed. And somebody once said, to be employed is to be at risk, because you will be at risk. There's no such thing as a permanent job. There are academics being laid off at the moment because of COVID, and, you know, the finances of the universities aren't so great now. So you can never guarantee a permanent position. But if you take care of your employability and you remain employable, you keep yourself up to date, even after you finish your PhD, you will still have to keep learning. You still have to keep on learning new skills, maybe taking other courses, always looking around for the next opportunity. So in order to do that, I will refer you to a Nobel laureate. It's Sir Paul Nurse, and he was the cell biology Nobel laureate, and he's the head of the Crick Institute in London and was the president of the Royal Society. And he says, if you work too hard, you will keep going in the same direction. And what he means by that is you can be in the lab and you can be doing all that functional work and generating your data and producing papers. That's great. But what you need to do is to step back and have a breather and look at the big picture and think about other things as well. So, you know, doing other things and allowing your brain to relax and then ideas come is very important. And there are all sorts of things that you can do. So I apologize for a very messy slide again, but look, if I show you the center of this is the PhD early career researcher going straight ahead towards the academic, okay? So the group leader or professor and producing kind of research work, generating data, papers, and so on. But all these other things are necessary, even to get to be a professor. You need to be being proactive, you need to be being visible, people need to know about you. You need to collaborate with other people and be strategic. You need to always be trying out new things and also paying attention to your career development. And even if you decide not to be a professor or you get so far and you realize that's not going to be possible, because you're doing all these other things, it will help you then to move into other areas because you will be paying attention and doing multiple projects and trying out new things, and you'll have more to put on your CV. You'll be a richer, more colourful, diverse person. So you'll have more options. So just bear that in mind. And also I have another PhD comics illustration, which I think is really good. It shows a PhD researcher inside in a darkened room with no windows and so busy focusing on their research that they don't see what's going on outside. And I know when I was working in research, we didn't even know what people were doing 2 doors away from where we were. So do keep an open mind and think about you as the researcher, you know, be developing the researcher as well as your research. And so on that note, I will wish you success and thank you for your attention. I've left you all my contact details there. So if you want to get in touch or link with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter, then I'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really helpful. We do have a few questions. So sometimes PhDs are told that they need to go abroad for the first job to like gain new skills and get to work in a different environment. What do you think of this idea? Do you think PhDs, for example, French-speaking PhDs should go to English-speaking countries? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually run a workshop on academic mobility or intellectual mobility, I think we should call it. It's a question mark because I think it can be interpreted in many different ways. What you first of all need to think about is why. Why are you going to do this? What do you want to get from it? So you're saying, would it be a good idea to go to an English-speaking country to improve your English skills? Well, maybe it would be. Maybe you could go to a lab or a research group in Germany where everyone speaks English as soon as you walk into the building because they've got a multi-international group of people there, and perhaps that will be enough for you to learn your English. What's most important is why you're going to do it. Who is it going to be with? Will they be supportive of you? Is it a good supervisor? Is it a good research group? Could you do it by just doing a short trip? Could you get a short-term fellowship? Could you go and do a research group visit to another group and sort of spend some time with them? And that would be your academic mobility. Maybe you could spend some time in a company and doing some research there. So I think, and I've got, if you go on my website, I've actually got a page on academic mobility, and I've got a graph there showing, you know, distance versus time. You know, you can go for a long time and even permanently abroad to the other side of the world, and that's the extreme case. Or you can pop across the border, or you can spend a short time, go on a visit or even to a conference, and that would be enough. So yes, start with the reason why first, and then go from there.
Thank you. So that was actually a question from Marine, and now I have a question from Paulina. So for people who actually went abroad, how can they make sure they maintain a professional network with people in their home country? And how can they prepare for repatriation? So going back to their home country after being abroad, given that the pandemic is going to disturb a bit everything.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you want to come back, then again, you need to start building a network. It's a bit like, you know, you're trying to move back, trying to move into an industry, you would try to build a network there. So who is it who you know already, perhaps, that you can start making some links with, perhaps link with them on LinkedIn or on ResearchGate or on social media, or send them an email. You know, I'm coming back, I'm looking for, you know, someone who's friendly. You know, you wouldn't write that to somebody you've never met before. You have to move very slowly and think about potential collaborations. It could be that if you are carrying on in research and academia, that you could perhaps write a grant together. You know, you could apply for a research fellowship in that country, and you know, apply for an ERC fellowship or Marie Curie or whatever, and you know, approach a host to host you in that country. And I know people who've done that and moved from California to Montpellier and done exactly that. So yes, you need to definitely build your network, and don't be afraid to do that. I mean, always, you know, present yourself, as I say, use those rules where you've got a good profile, you've got a nice professional email with your details there, and you know, you're on LinkedIn or ResearchGate, and I think you would be well received.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone. We'll stop here for tonight. It was a bit longer than our usual webinars, but it was really nice to have you with us, Sarah. It was a terrific presentation and very rich, dense, and full of pieces of advice. So thank you so much. And thank you also, Sarah and Virginie, for your help in moderating this webinar. Next week, there will be another webinar at 7 p.m. Paris time on the exploration of the job markets, and that one will be in French. The next webinar in English will take place in 2 weeks from now, on February 16th, and will focus on networking. In the meantime, we'll stay in touch in the forum discussions, in the collaborative documents and walls on the MOOC platform. And Unit 4 will open tomorrow and will focus on the exploration of the job market. Thank you and have a great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.